Have you ever noticed that your most confident reads on people happen when you're least safe? Not physically unsafe, internally unsafe. The moment someone says something that lands wrong, the moment a silence lasts a beat too long, the moment you detect a shift in someone's tone that you can't quite name but your body registers immediately. Suddenly, you know exactly who they are. You know their motivation. You know their hidden agenda. You know what they really think of you, what they're not saying, what they're planning. And this knowing arrives with such speed, such precision, such absolute certainty that it feels indistinguishable from perception. It feels like you're seeing clearly because the situation demands it. But what if the situation doesn't demand clear seeing at all? What if it demands survival, and your nervous system has been calling survival perception for so long that you can no longer tell the difference? Because that's the confusion at the center of how you navigate the world. You think you're reading people. Your nervous system thinks it's staying alive. And because both processes happen in the same body, using the same channels, producing the same feeling of certainty, you spent your entire adult life mistaking threat assessment for insight. The person who triggers your survival response isn't necessarily dangerous. But your nervous system, which learned its threat detection in environments where the threats were real and the stakes were survival itself, has never updated its software. It's still running childhood code in adult situations. And every time it activates, it delivers its report with the same urgency it once used to warn you about actual danger. Only now the danger is someone's indifference, or their confidence, or their success, or their boundary, or their mere existence in a configuration that reminds your nervous system of something it once had to survive. You receive the report as intuition. It's actually a threat response dressed in perceptual clothing. Think about the last time you met someone and immediately felt you understood them. Not gradually, not over time, instantly. They walked into the room or appeared on your screen or spoke their first sentence and something in you just knew. You knew they were arrogant or insecure or manipulative or lost. You knew it before you had any information that could justify such certainty. And because the knowing felt so immediate, so visceral, so unquestionable, you trusted it completely. You named it perception. You named it intuition. You named it reading people. But what if that instant knowing was actually your nervous system recognizing a pattern from your survival history and firing a preloaded response? What if your intuition was just your amygdala, trained by past threats, now applying that training to a person who resembles those threats in some subtle, probably irrelevant way? You wouldn't be reading them, you'd be surviving them. And survival, by its nature, doesn't care about accuracy. It cares about speed, it cares about certainty, it cares about acting now and verifying later, if ever. The confidence you feel isn't the confidence of understanding. It's the confidence of a system that evolved to keep you alive, not to keep you correct. This confusion between survival and perception is so fundamental that most people never notice it. They move through their days in a constant state of low-grade threat detection, reading every interaction for danger, every person for hidden hostility, every social situation for the subtle signs that precede abandonment or humiliation or loss of control. And because this detection happens automatically, beneath conscious awareness, they experience it as simply seeing the world clearly. I'm just perceptive, they say. I pick up on things other people miss. But what they're picking up on isn't necessarily present in the current moment. It's the residue of past moments when vigilance was necessary, when misreading a situation could have consequences, when being wrong about someone's intentions wasn't just embarrassing, it was dangerous. The nervous system remembers those moments. It stores the patterns. And when it encounters even a faint resemblance, it deploys the full survival response, complete with the certainty that demands immediate action, and the confidence that makes doubt feel like weakness. The scenario plays out in the most ordinary interactions. You're in a meeting and someone interrupts you, not aggressively, not even rudely, just the normal rhythm of a fast conversation where people occasionally talk over each other. But your body responds as if something significant has happened. Your heart rate increases slightly. Your attention narrows. Your mind begins generating a read on this person. They're dominant. They don't respect me. This is a power move. And within seconds, you have a psychological profile that feels accurate, that feels warranted, that feels like the only reasonable interpretation of what just occurred. But what if your nervous system is responding not to the interruption, but to a childhood pattern, where being interrupted meant being silenced, where your words were consistently overridden, where speaking up carried a risk you learned to monitor constantly? The person in the meeting isn't dangerous. Your history is. And your nervous system, brilliant protector that it is, has just recruited an innocent moment into your survival archive, generating certainty where none is warranted, creating conflict where none exists, all while convincing you that you're simply perceptive enough to see what others miss. Consider the person who always knows when someone is being fake. They enter every social situation with their authenticity detector on high alert. They pride themselves on not being fooled, on seeing through performance, on recognizing the subtle signs of inauthenticity that others miss. And they're not wrong, social life does involve performance. But their detection isn't calibrated to inauthenticity in general. It's calibrated to the specific kind of inauthenticity that once kept them safe. The performance they themselves had to maintain in environments where authenticity was punished. The mask they wore to survive situations where showing their real self meant rejection or danger. Their nervous system learned to detect performance not as a social skill but as a survival necessity. If they could spot the masks others wore, they could predict the threats those masks concealed. And now, in adult social life, that same detection system fires constantly, seeing danger in normal social smoothing, reading threat into polite performance, interpreting every social grace as evidence of hidden hostility. They don't see people clearly. They see survival patterns. And because survival demands certainty, they feel certain about reads that are actually just their nervous system protecting them from a danger that no longer exists. Or take the person who immediately distrusts anyone who is too nice too quickly. Someone opens up, shares vulnerably, expresses warmth, offers connection, and their nervous system screams warning. They feel the immediate read form. This person is love bombing. They're trying to get something from me. No one is this genuine this fast. And they feel the satisfaction of having protected themselves, of not being naive, of seeing the angle before the angle could work on them. But where did that read come from? Did it come from the person in front of them? Or did it come from a history where warmth was the prelude to exploitation, where vulnerability was bait, where connection was the first move in a game that always ended with them being used? Their nervous system isn't reading the present person. It's reading the past, projected onto the present, and calling the projection intuition. The confidence they feel isn't the confidence of accuracy. It's the confidence of survival, of having learned at great cost that certain patterns precede certain dangers, and of having decided that it's safer to be wrong about someone being dangerous than to be wrong about someone being safe. The text doesn't come when you expect it, not late enough to be concerning, just late enough to trigger the system, and in that gap between expectation and arrival, your nervous system goes to work. It doesn't wait patiently. It generates narratives. It constructs reads. It builds psychological profiles out of silence. They're pulling away. They're losing interest. This is the beginning of the end. And you feel the certainty of these reads because your body is involved. Your chest tightens. Your mind races. Your attention fixates on the phone as if it contains survival information. But the text is just a text. The delay is just a delay. The person on the other end is probably just living their life, unaware that their ordinary existence has triggered your threat detection system. Your read of their emotional withdrawal isn't perception. It's your nervous system, trained by past abandonments, now interpreting normal human inconsistency as the early warning signs of the same danger it once had to survive. You're not reading them. You're reading your own survival history through their behavior, and because survival feels urgent, the read feels true. This is why your perceptions of people are so often binary, so quick, so absolute. Real perception is gradual. It's layered, it holds contradiction, it tolerates not knowing. But survival perception is binary, threat or safe, dangerous or fine, abandon or trust. There's no middle ground because survival doesn't have middle ground. Your nervous system evolved in an environment where hesitation could mean death, where nuance was a luxury, where the cost of misclassifying a threat as safe was much higher than the cost of misclassifying safety as a threat. So it errs on the side of threat. It sees danger everywhere. And because it sees danger everywhere, you experience the world as full of people whose hidden motives, whose subtle hostility, whose quiet manipulation you're perceptive enough to detect. But what you're detecting isn't their psychology. It's your own survival system's default setting, which is assume threat until proven otherwise, and feel certain about that assumption because certainty leads to faster action, and faster action saved your ancestors' lives. The more intelligent you are, the more sophisticated this survival perception confusion becomes. Intelligence doesn't free your nervous system from its survival programming. It just gives that programming better vocabulary. A less intelligent person might feel uneasy around someone and simply avoid them. But an intelligent person feels uneasy and immediately constructs a psychological explanation. They have attachment issues. They're emotionally unavailable. They're performing a persona. They reference concepts, cite patterns, build theories that feel intellectually rigorous. And because the theory feels rigorous, they never notice that the foundation was a nervous system response, not an observation. Their intelligence has become a tool for justifying survival reactions rather than examining them. They can map everyone else's psychology while their own nervous system runs unchecked, generating certainty after certainty, each one dressed in the language of insight, each one actually just the same survival pattern, wearing a more sophisticated mask. Think about the last time you were in a conflict where you were absolutely certain you were right. Not just factually right, psychologically right. You understood the other person's motives. You saw their patterns. You recognized their defense mechanisms. You felt the clarity of genuine psychological insight, the satisfaction of finally seeing what was really driving them. And maybe you were seeing something real, but were you seeing them? Or were you seeing your nervous system's interpretation of them, filtered through your own survival history, colored by your own threat responses, shaped by your own need to be the one who sees clearly in a situation where feeling unclear would mean vulnerability? Because in conflict, clarity is often just the preferred defense. It's easier to be certain about someone else's psychology than to sit with the uncertainty of your own. It's safer to diagnose them than to feel the threat that their position represents to your sense of self. Your certainty in conflict is usually your nervous system's way of keeping you from feeling the thing that would actually help you grow. The person who actually sees clearly doesn't feel certain in conflict. They feel curious. They feel confused. They feel the discomfort of not knowing why the other person is behaving the way they are, and they stay in that discomfort instead of resolving it with a psychological read that makes them feel safe. Real clarity is slow because it requires actually receiving the other person, which means tolerating the threat response they trigger in you without immediately converting that response into a story about their character. But survival-based perception is fast because it doesn't receive. It protects. It scans, detects, categorizes, and acts. And the action it most often takes is the generation of a narrative that explains why the other person is the problem, why your response is justified, why your certainty is warranted. The narrative feels like understanding. It's actually avoidance, and the confidence with which you deliver it is the confidence of someone who is defending themselves, not exploring truth. This survival perception confusion operates at the deepest level of your identity. If you built a sense of self around being perceptive, around being the one who gets it, around having superior intuition, then questioning your reads doesn't just require intellectual humility, it requires existential revision. It means admitting that what you thought was your greatest gift might actually be your greatest limitation, the mechanism by which you avoid genuine intimacy, authentic risk, and the vulnerability of not knowing. Because if your reads are actually survival responses, then every time you trust your intuition about people, you're actually trusting your threat detection system. And threat detection systems are designed to keep you safe, not to keep you connected. They're designed to create distance, not closeness. They're designed to see danger, not complexity. Every time you feel certain about someone, you might be feeling the success of your own isolation. The behavioral pattern becomes self-reinforcing. Your nervous system detects a threat pattern, generates a read, creates distance based on that read, prevents the intimacy that would disconfirm the read, reinforces your belief in your perceptiveness, and primes you to detect the same pattern even more quickly next time. It's a closed loop, and the loop protects itself by ensuring you never get close enough to anyone to discover that your initial survival response was wrong. You stay safe, you stay certain, you stay alone, and you call it discernment. But what you're actually experiencing is the progressive narrowing of your relational world as your nervous system, still running old survival code, progressively eliminates everyone who triggers its threat responses, which, because those responses are based on your history, means progressively eliminating the possibility of being known by anyone who resembles, however faintly, the people or situations that once hurt you. But what would it look like to actually tell the difference? Not to become naive, not to pretend everyone is safe, but to recognize the physiological signature of survival-based perception versus genuine curiosity. Survival perception arrives with urgency. Your body activates, your mind narrows, your need to be right becomes physical. Genuine curiosity arrives with openness. Your body settles, your mind expands. Your need to be right dissolves into interest. Survival perception wants to categorize. Genuine curiosity wants to understand. Survival perception feels like certainty in your chest. Genuine curiosity feels like wonder in your gut. And the practice of distinguishing between them isn't intellectual, it's somatic. It's learning to notice what your body is doing when you form an opinion about someone, and asking whether that body state is the state of receiving or the state of defending. The internal contradiction is what makes this so difficult to see from the inside. The very mechanism that creates your blindness presents itself as your sight. Your survival system wears the mask of your perception, and because the mask is so familiar, you never think to look behind it. You believe you're the exception, the one whose intuition is actually accurate, the one who really can read people, the one whose certainty comes from understanding rather than unprocessed threat. But that's what everyone believes. That's the universal feature of this mechanism, not the exception to it. The people who are most blind are the ones most convinced of their clarity, because their conviction is the survival system itself, and survival systems don't doubt. Doubt is slow, and slowness got your ancestors killed. Think about the times you've been completely wrong about someone's intentions. Not slightly wrong, radically, embarrassingly, relationship-damagingly wrong. The person you thought was manipulating you, who was actually terrified. The person you thought was arrogant, who was actually grieving. The person you thought was distant, who was actually depressed. In retrospect, the evidence was always there. You just couldn't see it because your survival response had already generated its read, and that read created a filter that only let through confirming information. You aren't wrong because you lacked data. You were wrong because your nervous system, operating faster than your consciousness, had already decided what the data meant, and that decision prevented you from receiving the data that would have corrected it. Your perception was active in creating your blindness. This is the awareness gap that keeps the mechanism hidden. You think you're observing people when you're actually surviving them. You think you're receiving impressions when you're actually deploying defenses. And because the deployment happens so fast, so automatically, so convincingly, you experience it as discovery rather than protection. You feel like you're finding truths about people when you're actually finding the threat patterns your nervous system learned decades ago, now projected onto new people and new situations that bear only the faintest resemblance to the original dangers. Your perception is actually a survival archive, and every person you meet is being searched against that archive before they're ever actually seen. The social dynamic this creates is subtle but pervasive. Groups form around shared survival perceptions. You bond with others over mutual reads. Can you believe how they acted? Did you see what they did? And the shared read creates intimacy, but it's intimacy built on a false foundation. You're not connecting over genuine understanding of the person you're reading. You're connecting over shared survival histories that happen to generate the same threat responses, the same defensive reads, the same protective certainties. The intimacy feels real because the emotion is real. The fear, the vigilance, the satisfaction of having protected yourself. But the content is projection, which means the connection is actually a mutual defense against vulnerability, dressed as friendship. You're not friends because you see the world similarly. You're friends because you survived similarly, and your nervous systems recognize each other's patterns. And the validation dependency that underlies this is relentless. Every read that gets confirmed by others becomes evidence of your perceptiveness. Every "you're so right about them" becomes another brick in the identity you've built around being the one who sees. But validation of survival-based perception is not validation of truth. It's just multiple nervous systems sharing the same threat patterns, and the social reinforcement makes those patterns harder, not easier, to update. You become trapped in an echo chamber of mutual survival, where everyone confirms everyone else's defensive reads, and no one ever asks the dangerous question: what if we're all just protecting ourselves from past dangers and calling it understanding? The delayed emotional reaction is often where the truth finally seeps through. You have the red in the moment, certain and sharp. Your nervous system fully activated, your body convinced of the threat. But hours later, sometimes days later, something shifts. Your body settles. Your mind opens. You remember a detail that doesn't fit your narrative. You feel a strange softness that you can't name. You find yourself wondering for just a second if you got it wrong. But by then, you've already acted on your read. You've already created distance, or sent the message, or told the story to 3 friends who confirmed your survival interpretation. The doubt arrives too late, and the nervous system, brilliant at protecting coherence, dismisses it. I was just tired. I'm overthinking. My first instinct was right. And the loop closes again. But what if you started paying attention to those delayed reactions instead of dismissing them? What if you treated that subtle softness not as weakness, but as signal? Not that your read was wrong necessarily, but that your read was incomplete, that there was more to see, that your initial certainty was covering something your nervous system didn't want you to notice. What if the moments when you feel most activated are actually the moments when you should be most suspicious of your own perception? The identity instability that emerges when you seriously consider this is significant. If your intuition is actually survival, who are you? If your certainty is actually defense, what is actually true about your relationships? If you can't trust your gut about people, how do you navigate a world full of actual threats? These questions are disorienting because they strike at the foundation of the self you've constructed. But they're also the doorway to something more stable than survival-based identity. They're the doorway to genuine presence, to actual curiosity, to the kind of relating that doesn't require you to be the most vigilant person in the room, because it doesn't require you to be anything other than present. Because here's what replaces survival-based perception when you stop letting your nervous system run unchecked: attention. Not the performative attention of someone scanning for threats disguised as insight, but the simple, open attention of someone who is actually there, receiving what is actually happening, without the urgent need to translate it into a survival narrative. This attention is quieter than perception. It doesn't give you the same hit of certainty or superiority. It often leaves you more vulnerable rather than less. But it's the only kind of attention that actually connects you to another person rather than to your own threat response to them. The person who has done this work, who has genuinely examined their own survival perception patterns, rather than just intellectually acknowledge them, moves through the world differently. They still have reactions. They still feel immediate threat responses. But they hold these reactions lightly. They know that their first response is usually their history speaking, not their wisdom. They don't suppress the reaction, but they don't trust it either. They let it be there. They notice what it might be telling them about what still needs healing. And they wait. They wait for the second response. The slower one, the one that comes from having sat with activation long enough for something genuine to emerge. And they know that this second response might be completely different from the first, and they're willing to be wrong about their first impression in a way that the survival-dependent person cannot afford to be. This is the behavioral shift that no one talks about when they discuss self-awareness. It's not about being nicer. It's not about pretending everyone is safe in a naive way. It's about recognizing that your nervous system is constantly generating survival responses that masquerade as perceptions, and choosing not to act on those perceptions until you've tested them against present reality over time. It's about developing the capacity to say, "I don't know who this person is yet," and mean it, even when your body is screaming that you do know, that it's obvious, that only a fool wouldn't see the threat. It's about trusting the slow over the fast, the settled over the activated, the curious over the defended. The ego exposure in this process is intense. You have to admit, not just once but continuously, that your nervous system lies to you, not maliciously protectively, but lies nonetheless. You have to admit that what felt like your greatest strength, your ability to read people, might actually be your greatest blind spot, the mechanism by which you avoid genuine intimacy and authentic risk. You have to sit with the possibility that you've been wrong about people you were certain about, that you've damaged relationships with your false confidence, that you've built an identity on a misperception. This is not comfortable work. This is the work of updating your nervous system's threat detection to match your actual adult environment, rather than letting it continue running the survival patterns it learned when you were powerless. And the perception versus reality gap never fully closes. Even as you do this work, even as you become more aware of your survival perception patterns, you will still confuse the two. The mechanism is too fundamental to eliminate. But what changes is your relationship to it. You begin to catch it faster. You begin to hold your reads more lightly. You begin to ask in moments of sharp certainty, what if this is my survival system? Not as a rhetorical device, but as a genuine question. You begin to notice the body state that accompanies your certainty, and you learn to distrust certainty that arrives with activation, tension, urgency. You learn that the reads you can deliver most confidently are often the ones you should hold most loosely. The social dynamics shift too. Your relationships become slower to form but deeper when they do, because you're no longer bonding over shared survival responses. Your conflicts become more productive because you're less certain that you're right, which means you're more able to hear the other person's actual experience rather than your threat-based interpretation of it. Your solitude becomes more comfortable because you're no longer filling it with vigilance about the people around you. You're just there with them in the uncertainty of not fully knowing them yet, and in that uncertainty, something genuine becomes possible. The internal contradiction that makes this sustainable is that you become more accurate about others precisely by becoming less certain about them. Your reads, when they do arrive, are slower but more grounded. Your intuition, stripped of its survival component, becomes actually trustworthy in ways it never was before. But you pay for this accuracy with the loss of the quick certainty that once made you feel so perceptive. You trade the sharp, satisfying hit of survival-based perception for the slower, quieter, more uncertain work of genuine attention. And you discover that what you thought was clarity was actually just activation. And that real clarity moves at the pace of settled presence, not at the pace of your nervous system's need to protect you. So the next time you feel that sharp certainty about someone, that immediate knowing, that precise read, that intuitive hit that arrives with your body engaged and your mind narrowed, pause, not to suppress it, not to deny it, but to examine it. Ask yourself what survival need this read might be serving. Ask yourself what your body is doing right now. Ask yourself if you're willing to be uncertain about this person in order to possibly be right about something more important. Ask yourself if your clarity is actually your nervous system doing what it was designed to do, which is keep you safe, not keep you accurate, because the sharpest perceptions are usually the ones that cut you off from seeing. The most satisfying reads are usually the ones that prevent genuine understanding, and the intuition that arrives instantly, fully formed, and physically activated is usually not intuition at all. It's survival, disguised as perception, demanding that the present conform to the dangers of the past. Real seeing is slower, it's less activated, it's less certain, but it's the only kind that actually sees anything other than your own history. And if you can sit with that, if you can tolerate the loss of your sharpest reads, the ones that made you feel intelligent and perceptive and safe, what remains is something quieter but more real. Not the you who reads everyone perfectly, the you who is finally present enough to actually meet them at all.